Thanks, Andreas. Hey, good morning. I'm excited to start the last day of the conference together with you. Unfortunately, there's always one person on the stage with a boring topic. And I want to talk about tidying up the room before you go out and have fun. I want to talk about 99% of threat intelligence that requires tidying up. Otherwise, it will waste your time and it will frustrate you. Frustration, waste of time, these are two ingredients of a good alert fatigue. And I will talk about how that relates to a threat intel fatigue. But before we start, let's look at, here you go. Let's look at what a fatigue actually means. It is a medical term. It describes the experience of low energy that is not caused by normal life. So it doesn't mean you're just tired, often in the context of being of a disease. Alert fatigue is also a term from the medical world. It describes busy people being overwhelmed by alerts of no or low priority, and as a result of that, start to fail to respond to alerts. That sounds quite familiar, right? Being overwhelmed by alerts is a real problem in the cyber world, especially if it is an experience as a waste of time. It's very frustrating. 25% of analysts' time is normally wasted on false alerts. That's a lot. That's a lot of time. It's also no surprise that 80% of the cybersecurity professionals say they feel some level of burnout. Unfortunately, the gap of cybersecurity professionals worldwide means also we are not able to distribute the burdens to more shoulders. Alert fatigue seems to be an understandable consequence here. Okay, let's look behind the symptoms. What can we blame for that? What can we blame for the causes of 20% of all alerts are false alerts? What can we blame for 40% of all alerts are of low priority? The star here is default or outdated alert rules. The second one, not a surprise, malfunctioning software, hardware, and people. I cannot help with malfunctioning colleagues, that's another topic, but I want to look into data. Irrelevant, misinterpreted, redundant data, especially how being desensitized on threat intelligence information actually leads to false alerts. Like a flood of alerts, the universe of threat intelligence sources is already overwhelming. There are so many different sources out there. Different formats, different purposes, different quality, different use cases. So with the lack of time in teams, with the lack of visibility into those sources, that means it's a tough job to even evaluate if a threat intel source is relevant for me. Another challenge is the high dynamics of the universe of sources. Between August and October, we have observed a 3% decrease of free sources out of 250 observed sources that stopped providing updates or simply disappeared. That's a huge number for such a short time. So overloaded teams actually stop trying to keep up with those changes, with that universe. That is very similar to the characteristics of an alert fatigue. Let's look at some common approaches you will find when it it comes to managing threat intelligence sources. One is the one-fits-all approach. That is very common in the small and medium business companies or MSSPs focused on the SMB market. No doubt, it's very comfortable to think that one single solution with built-in intelligence is actually covering everything, right? If we look at the average overlap, and I just provided some samples here, at the average overlap between different types of threat intelligence sources with different focuses, you can quickly recognize it's very questionable this will work out. Also, every use case, every company, every team, every industry has an own unique attack surface. Relying on a single provider, on a single solution, doesn't seem to be the right answer here. Very similar is also the set and forget approach. So once identified, a set of threat intelligence sources is never touched again. Maybe the expert left the company, maybe the teams don't have time. But it's not only a question of smaller teams, a problem in smaller teams. We have analyzed the threat intelligence integrations into a SIEM solution. The documentation of that SIEM solution claimed they have 5 open source integrations, and you can simply activate them to cover against threats. So guess how many of the 5 integrations of the 5 feeds were still active when reading the documentation, the current documentation? Give it a try. Any guess? No? Very good. Exactly. One out of 5, and it's a current product. What do you think, since how much time, how long the inactives have been inactive already? I answer that for you. 2 to 5 years. The oldest one was 5 years already inactive. So you don't need to be a fortune teller to see why that will cause issues. My favorite approach, one of my favorite approaches, is the more the better approach. On average, an enterprise uses 17 sources for threat intelligence. The more the better approach means every time you have a new threat, every time you have a breach, you add an additional source. Unhappily, that means you cause more work. Every source needs to be evaluated, need to be operated, need to be integrated, you need to do troubleshooting, you need to handle the resources in your security solution. How much data can your security solution, no matter what you use, if it's a TIP or a SIEM or a SOA or whatever, how much data can that solution handle? So you are restricted in time, you are restricted in resources, you are restricted when it comes to budget. Last but not least, every source introduces noise, and noise leads to false alerts. That is a warm welcome to an alert fatigue. Not too many, not just a few, not too static. So what are good approaches or better approaches to manage threat intelligence sources? That starts with being aware and being active. Know and being aware what challenges do exist when you manage threat intelligence sources. That already is the first step. And then measure at each step. Measure each step of your source management. This lets you understand the causes of alerts, of false alerts, that let you make informed decisions and become more mature, let you decrease the waste of time and frustration. When it comes to identifying a source, It's a good idea to be open and objective. A few examples here, 2 charts. Those charts show the average false positive rate. Each chart shows 1 paid and 1 free source. Can you easily guess which one is the free source and which one is the paid source? The first chart, the orange line is the free source. The second chart, the blue one is the free source. What that shows is it's not just a question of how much you pay for a source, it's a question of being objective and open. The more objective you are, the more mature your source management will be. Another good advice is, if you don't know where to start collecting information. Create a catalog of threat intelligence sources across your company, across your organization. Where is it used? What is used? By whom? And for which purpose? And then identify how can you easily measure and quickly measure. Measuring can be as easy as how many updates are provided. It can be as easy as how much content is provided. And it's not a question of volume. It's a question of the trend. The left one shows a normal update behavior. That's not an issue at all. The right one, that is a source you really should think about removing it simply because it became outdated. It has the potential of increase your false alerts based on, for example, aging problems. The next step is measure your false alerts. Measure every problem you see and track down which source caused it. To monitor if a source becomes worse over time, that makes you proactive. You can now adjust your set of threat intelligence sources. You can avoid more problems in your day-to-day work. You become more proactive and instead of becoming reactive. This one shows the average false positive rate of a free and a commercial source, both showing the same trend. They get worse over time. Can have many different reasons. The free source may have lost some contributors. The commercial source, maybe the commercial provider has shifted resources to a new topic, has implemented new analytics or whatever. Be proactive and know where the road actually leads you to. That's the advice here. These are just a few examples. If you start easy, you can, from there, improve over time. Of course, there's no limit. You can always unlock the next level. You can always get better, improve your maturity on managing your sources. Maybe you, at one time, you implement or already have implemented a passive environment to automatically evaluate any threat intelligence sources. In the conclusion, start easy and improve. Tidying up means you will stop wasting time or lower wasting time. Being aware and proactive, that eliminates reasons for an alert fatigue. Do that continuously, even if it's very boring sometimes. Thank you.
We have time for questions, I guess. Anybody? Any questions for Markus? I mean, I know it's still early in the morning, but do we have any questions about, this kind of common issue that we also face?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask the following questions. I'm here. So, when you talk about false positives, so in order to understand if it's false positive, would you triage of the whatever alert to understand is it what it is, because machines so far cannot distinguish is it what kind of alert it is. That's why humans have to be involved. So when you say that about the time of wasting 25% on false positives, do you include triaging, or it's then we triage falsely and then we spend chasing what doesn't exist?
Yeah, it's actually both, right? Very good question. The 25% is the time that you waste on chasing for something that ends up as being a false alert in most cases. But it means everything around false alerts that happens in the day-to-day security workday. That is, no matter if it's in working on a SOC in a SIEM, it's also chasing as part of IR. You have that everywhere. It depends. Of course, sometimes you need only 2 minutes and you know this is a false alert, this is nothing weird. You should chase. On others, you're wasting a lot of more time on that.
Any other question for Markus? So, Markus, if I may have a question. So, yesterday we have been discussing during the social event with some people about, you have new detections, you have new feeds, and you want to introduce them in your SOC. But we want first, before delivering them, we want to sandbox this kind of capability to see how would be the workload if we onboard all this kind of detections, of indicators of compromise. So we want to get the logs from the one place, from our organization, go back in time and see how would be the workload, how many hits we would have, and what's the false positive rate, and all about the workload. Do you have any idea of how this is done nowadays by different organizations? If there are any services offered for this kind of capabilities? Like getting all the detections, indicators, go back in time, replay them over 6 months, and see, do we have any hits in order to predict the workload and the false positive rate on the new detections, on the new IOCs that we onboard? Any idea?
No, that's very hard to answer, right? It really depends on the amount. And it's also a question, how do you have the data and the information today, right? If you correlate that, let's say, with 200 additional sources and need to move 1 terabyte of data that is totally not in one format, it depends on one source. Do you have to combine and converge from multiple sources? It's a very hard question, actually. But yeah, it takes a lot of time. I can promise you this one.
Yeah, we have been thinking yesterday it's quite difficult to do it, moving all the data, or maybe generate data that look like your organizational data and correlate against new detections, new indicators of compromise.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other question before we give? Yeah.
Hi. What would be an acceptable percentage of false positives?
That's a good question. How many people do you have? So I can answer that from a different perspective, maybe. I once worked for IBM's X-Force team in the research part for Threat Intel, and one of the requirements for each new analytics method was a percentage for false positives of 0.00001%. So you can see it can be very low, but it really depends on how much people do you have, how much time do you spend on that. It should be always a good balance between the effort you have to drive, but these days you have more problems getting the right people. So you don't want to waste the time of your people on stuff that is not of value for the company. It's a balanced question.
Any other question for Markus? If not, let's give another round. We have one more.
I'm just curious as to where do your statistics come from? Because last time I worked at a SOC, it was absolutely not 20% of false positives. So.
Which percentage? Sorry?
I mean, all of them. I mean, you got a bunch of statistics here, which are very interesting. I'm just curious as to where they come from. Is that a global study, or is it from within your company, or just curious?
Yeah, very good question. And sorry for not showing the sources. So most of the trends and the charts are actually our own work. We are monitoring around 540 sources these days in real time, and provide false positive categories, apply that, and then measure the noise. While noise is more than false positives, noise means parsing errors. Noise means stuff that doesn't matter in the day-to-day security operations. False positives is a different topic that is a subset of that. But most of these do come from our own work, yeah.
Still have time for a couple of questions. Anybody? Okay, if not, let's give another round of applause for Markus. Thank you very much.
Thank you.